Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a creaky floorboard world of lace curtains, lukewarm tea, and long silences. You're wearing black, you've been wearing black for weeks and the neighbors keep saying you're so strong, but all you've done lately is cry into your embroidery. We're back in the 19th century, but not the ballrooms or battlefields kind. No, you're a widow now, and tonight, you move through your house like a ghost with keys. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere quiet, somewhere soft, post your location and local time. We always love seeing how far our sleepy travels go. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake in a house that feels emptier than your spine. The sheets are rumpled only on one side. The fireplace is cold, and when you shuffle into the kitchen, slippers, robe, hair hastily pinned, you still put out 2 teacups. Reflex. That's all it is. You stand staring at them, as if expecting one to blink away like a ghost, but they both sit there, porcelain and indifferent. You don't cry this morning. You cried yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. Today you just exist. You boil water, pour the tea, and leave 1 cup untouched. You pretend it's a guest, a habit, anything but what it is, hope that forgot to catch up with reality. The dining chair creaks as you sit, and outside, the garden is exactly as he left it. The shears still hang by the trellis. The hose is coiled like a sleeping snake. You try to tell yourself this is just a phase of life, like spring or bad knees. Back then, they didn't have grief counselors. No tech-took advice on healing your heart in 5 steps. No podcasts titled YO and Thriving. No, you had black dresses, somber glances, and whatever routine could keep your soul from melting through the floorboards. And maybe, just maybe, you had a diary. But you haven't opened it yet. Not today. Today is still too sharp, too full of corners. Instead, you dust the windowsill, fold handkerchiefs you already folded, rearrange the cutlery drawer by size, then by shine, then by frequency of use. You tell yourself this is being productive. Truth is, you're just dodging memories shaped like butter knives. The cat named Button, of course, jumps up on the table. He doesn't seem to care that someone's missing. He purrs and presses his head against your forearm. You envy that. The uncomplicated way he continues. By noon, you've counted the chimes of the grandfather clock more times than you'll admit. The wind knocks something loose in the attic, and for half a second you think it's his footstep. But no. Just the house remembering. Historians still argue whether the mourning customs of the 19th century were truly for grief or simply for control. Black veils. Seclusion. No music for a year. Maybe it kept society tight. Maybe it gave people space. Or maybe, just maybe, it gave you permission to stop pretending. Because pretending is exhausting. Smiling at the neighbor when she says, "Isn't a better place?" You wanted to ask, "Better than tea with me?" But instead you just nodded and bit the inside of your cheek. At some point, you try to do laundry, but his shirt is still draped over the wash basket, and you just can't. Not yet. So you sit back down. Again. Chair. Sigh. Set. Stare. Here's the quirky part. You consider talking to the furniture. And not ironically. You're halfway into asking the armoire if it's chilly when Button sneezes and breaks the spell. You laugh, and it startles you. It's the first time your face has lifted in days. There's something strange about laughter when you're grieving. It feels like betrayal. Like you've invited sunshine to a funeral. But also it's a crack. And through cracks, light gets in. You look over to the writing desk. It's been there. In the corner, since your wedding day. He bought it for you, said a lady should always have a place to write her thoughts. You thought he was being dramatic. Now you think he was being prophetic. You stand up. Walk over. The wood creaks under your weight. Or maybe in welcome. You open the drawer. Inside, dried lavender, 3 unused stamps, a bit of lace, and the diary. The one with the leather cover, and the little brass lock. No key, never needed one. The lock isn't to keep others out. It's to keep you in. You run your fingers across the cover. You remember writing in it once, years ago, when you were angry at him for forgetting your anniversary. The ink bled a little because your tears smudged the page. Funny how many emotions bleed the same. Outside, a sparrow lands on the windowsill. It chirps once. Just once. And you take that as permission. You open the diary. The paper smells like time. That dry, powdery scent of old lion and dried glue. You run a finger down the inside cover. And find, faintly penciled, the year you bought it, 1846. Back when you were still Miss Lillian Harper, and life felt like a freshly starched apron, crisp, full of promise, maybe a little stiff in the wrong places. You flip past a few pages. Empty, save for one doodle of a crooked flower, drawn sometime in spring, maybe while waiting for bread to rise, maybe just to avoid suing. Now though, it's time. You dip the pen. It scrapes gently as the nib touches paper. You hesitate. What exactly do you write to someone who's no longer here to read it? You begin anyway. Dear Thomas, the words come in a whisper. Even on the page. You don't write anything profound. Just what the day felt like. That he had tea. And Button ate a moth, and the wind sounds lonely in the chimney. That his hat still hangs on the peg and it caught your eye, made your heart leap for half a second like a startled rabbit. You paused. Write some more. That Mrs. Cavendish from down the lane brought over a pie and kept trying not to stare at the empty chair beside yours. You write that you hated the pie, it was too sweet and that Thomas would have hated it too, and that you smiled anyway. You add, I hope it's not too hot where you are, or too cold. I can't quite decide which I'd prefer heaven to be. The candle flickers. The ink blotches slightly where your hand trembles. Not from sadness, precisely. More like from having finally said something out loud that's been coiled in your chest like a spool of thread wound too tight. Historians still argue whether women of your time wrote diaries for privacy or posterity. Whether it was emotional therapy or moral discipline. You don't particularly care. For you, it's survival. A small rebellion against the silence everyone expects you to maintain. You consider closing the diary but keep writing. You talk about the front porch. How one of the boards is loose again, and you don't know who to call. How you thought about fixing it yourself, but then imagine Thomas scolding you from beyond the veil. You'll ruin your back, love. You almost laughed, and then you cried. You write about your hair coming in gray at the temples. That you tried brushing it differently today, just for yourself. That you wore the lavender shawl he liked, even though no one would see it. You confess something odd. You missed his snoring. Not the sound, but the comfort of it. How it used to fill the dark with rhythm. Now the dark is just quiet. And you keep thinking you hear creaks that are him returning, but they never are. Here's the quirky bit of today. You swear you heard a voice in the mirror. You have been brushing your hair, muttering to yourself, and for a split second, you thought the mirror answered. Not in words, just a kind of knowing hush, like someone nodding from far away. You wrote it off, of course. But now, on paper, it feels almost true. You pause to rest your hand. Outside, the sparrow is gone. Replaced by the distant clip-clop of someone's carriage along the road. You wonder if it's Mr. Aldridge from the apothecary, or young Clara's father, or someone new to the village, as someone who hasn't yet heard your awaito and might still ask after your husband. That happened yesterday. A man delivering coal asked, "Where's the mister?" You blinked at him, and your mouth opened, but nothing came out. He apologized, fumbled, left the coal too close to the roses. The ink begins to dry as you write the final lines of your entry. I didn't speak to anyone today, not really. But I feel like I talked to you. That's something, isn't it? You don't sign it. You never sign these. What would be the point? You close the diary softly, like tucking a child into bed. The room feels warmer somehow. Not better, not healed but aired out. Less stifling. Like you've cracked open a window in your own ribcage. You blow out the candle, and sit a moment in the dark. Just long enough to hear the ticking of the clock, the rustle of buttons settling in. Beside the stove, and the wind pressing gently against the window panes. You don't expect tomorrow to be much different. But at least you know what you'll do at this same time. Sit, open the diary, and write to someone who doesn't answer but listens all the same. Morning greets you without ceremony. No trumpet of light, no bird-song crescendo, just the faint creak of the rafters, and the dull itch of your knees as you sit up in bed. Button is already pacing at the edge of the quilt, tail flicking impatiently, as if to say, yes, yes, grief is eternal, but breakfast is late. You oblige him, of course. You always do. Because tending to something even a slightly rude cat is preferable to tending to the void. In the kitchen, everything is where you left it. The teacups. The spoon with the slightly bent handle. The jar of plum preserves that expired last autumn but still looks mostly trustworthy. You pull out your familiar blue tin of loose leaf tea, scoop exactly one spoonful into the pot, and pour the hot water with the kind of reverence once reserved for church. You set out 2 cups again, as always. And once again, you try not to look directly at the second. Instead, you focus on routine. Mornings, you've decided, are measured in teaspoons. 1 for the tea. 1 for sugar. 1 to stir. 1 to scrape Button's food into his dish. 1 to fish a bit of jam onto toast. And sometimes, just sometimes, 1 to tap nervously on the windowsill when the house feels too quiet. You write again today. Not a long entry. Just a note about the weather. Chill wind. The kind that makes your bones whisper. And a sentence about Mrs. Carmichael's hens escaping again. You write, they trailed through my cabbages like tiny revolutionaries. Historians might call this domestic literature. A term that sounds both dismissive and precious. As if by writing about spoons and hens and a badly mended hymn you are somehow wasting paper. But you know the truth. This is life. The shape of it. The fabric of whitewood isn't woven from epiphanies. It's stitched from teaspoons. Later, you decide to dust the bookshelf. Not out of necessity, let's be honest. No one is visiting but because the sun falls just so on the spines, making them glow like relics. You pause over A Midsummer Night's Dream and remember when Thomas tried to recite Puck's final monologue while hiccuping on too much port. You laughed so hard you dropped a whole tray of jam tarts. You smile again, briefly. Then dust the memory away like any other shell. Here's today's oddity. The clock stopped. Not at midnight, dramatically. Just sometime between tea and the second slice of toast. You noticed it only because the chimes didn't come. You tapped the glass, wound it gently, but it refused to tick. You stared at its still hands for a full minute, wondering irrationally if Thomas had taken the time with him. You write about that, too. Clock gave up today. Might follow suit. But you don't mean it. Not fully. It's just something to say. And something to look at on the page, which is somehow better than looking at the hallway he used to walk down whistling off key. You wash a handkerchief. Press it between towels. Fold it neatly and stack it with the others. There's no practical need for more pressed linen, but there's comfort in the motion. The folding. The clean line of a corner meeting a corner. This, too, goes in the diary. Historians still debate how many 19th century women kept daily journals. Some say it was rare, reserved for the literate, the lonely, or the bored. Others claim it was almost universal, a silent undercurrent in women's lives. Like hidden embroidery underskirts, invisible, but always there. You wonder if somewhere across the ocean or just down the lane another woman is doing the same right now. Pouring tea. Writing words no one will read. Folding time into paper. Afternoon arrives with a sigh. The kind of long, slow drift that doesn't distinguish itself from morning or evening. You sit on the porch, shawl over your shoulders, the diary closed in your lap. The postman walks by and tips his hat. You nod. Neither of you says anything. But you imagine a future where you might. Dinner is half a potato, some peas, and bread crusts softened in gravy. You hum while you cook. It surprises you, and Button, who watches you with that flat feline judgment. You hush yourself quickly. At night, you don't dream. Or if you do, they vanish before waking. But the bed feels less hollow than before. Not full. Never full. But less like falling. Before you sleep, you open the diary one last time and write, I heard myself hum today. It wasn't a song, I know. But it was mine. You notice it first in the shafo, they glance at you, then away. The woman weighing plums lingers on one, pressing too hard, as if waiting for you to disappear before she can drop it in her basket. The butcher, usually chatty, offers a curt nod and reaches for the next customer's cut before you've even counted your coins. It's not cruelty. Not quite. It's discomfort, trimmed in politeness. As if your presence has become a polite inconvenience. A reminder of what could happen to them. Or their daughters. Or anyone who's ever loved someone with lungs and a pulse. You write later, grief makes people uncomfortable. Like sneezing on a hymn. There's a new wayo on Rosewood Street. Much younger. Her name's Edith, and she walks like her shoes don't fit. You see her once by the fountain, twisting her gloves in a way that feels familiar. You almost go to her. Almost. But then someone else does. A woman with bright red feathers in her hatin. You retreat into the bakery, pretending to study tarts. Back home, the silence feels thicker after errands. Public stillness is manageable. It has structure. Shelves. Fuyus. Transactions. But private silence. That's a sea with no land in sight. You sit. Right. Again. Talked to 3 people today. 2 said sorry. 1 said nothing. The nothing stayed. Longer. Historians still argue whether Victorian social etiquette offered support or isolation for wayos. On one hand, there were mourning clothes, designated time frames, even formal cards expressing sympathy. On the other, there was the unspoken curfew on how long your sorrow was allowed to linger in public. Wear black too long, and you were morbid. Wear color too soon, and you were heartless. Today's odd moment comes courtesy of Mrs. Pelham's child. You passed them outside the tailor's, and the little girl pointed at your veil and asked, Is she a ghost, Mama? The mother hushed her, of course, but not before shooting you a look that was equal parts apology and alarm. You didn't mind. Children always ask what adults want. You write about that, too. Ghosts are often quieter than the living, and better company. Your diary is nearly half full now. Some pages are short, like thoughts caught mid-breath. Others ramble. One is just a list, things I missed: his laugh, his cough, his way of over-peppering eggs, his habit of leaving ink on his thumb. Today, you reread older entries. One from 2 weeks ago simply says, Nothing happened today. Still, I wrote it down. You think about that line for longer than you should. There's power in naming even nothing. It becomes a sort of record. A ledger of endurance. Late afternoon brings Mrs. Wentworth. Uninvited. She knocks thrice. Her knock always sounds judgmental and stands with a basket of seed cakes and a pamphlet titled God's Grace in Wyowood. You manage a thank you, smile with your lips but not your eyes, and decline her offer to come sit for a bit and talk about heaven. After she leaves, Button knocks over the basket. You let him. The cakes were dry anyway. You write, Heaven sounds too crowded today. I prefer the company of crumbs. Historians note that whitos were often expected to retreat socially, morally, emotionally. A kind of living pause. But what they don't mention enough is the mental choreography it takes. The constant adjusting of expression. The measured nods. The swallowing of opinions because no one wants sharp thoughts from someone wearing black. You once corrected the vicar on a passage from Psalms. He didn't thank you. Just blinked and mumbled something about how hard loss must be on memory. You've remembered that for months. Evening arrives without ceremony. You light a candle, open the window for a moment, then think better of it too chilly. The light flickers on the mirror, and for a second, your reflection looks like someone else. Someone older. Or maybe just someone who's had to grow into her own outline. You write, was called strong today. I think they mean quiet, or still, or hollow. But you don't feel hollow. Not tonight. Just tired. Worn in, like an old coat. And coats, you know, can still keep you warm. Tonight, you do something strange. You write a letter not in the diary, not on a loose scrap for kindling, but on real stationery. The good kind, with the faint blue lines and the embossed edge. You address it to him. Thomas. Of course. Then you tuck it in your apron pocket and go about your day as if it were a grocery list. You don't intend to send it. There's no address. Heaven doesn't have a postal code, and you're quite sure the mailman wouldn't know what to do with it. But writing it on proper paper makes it feel different. Less like a diary entry, more like an attempt at conversation. It starts simple, Thomas, it's been 73 days. And then it spills. You tell him how Button's gotten too bold and climbs the pantry shelves when he thinks you're not looking. How the roses are coming in late this year. How your sister keeps suggesting you come live with her, but you don't want to leave the house not yet. Not while it still smells faintly of pipe smoke and cedar. You mention the little Robin who's been hopping along the windowsill every morning. The one you're half convinced is spying on you. You describe its rust-colored chest, the way it cocks its head like it knows something. You joke though not really that maybe it is him, reincarnated with feathers and a shorter attention span. You fold the letter. Tuck it into a drawer beneath old handkerchiefs. You don't seal it. That would be too final. Historians still argue whether unsent letters like these were part of mourning rituals or simply private indulgences. Some say they were tools for processing. Others suggest they were a means to preserve a tether to keep the dead nearby without truly letting them go. You don't much care about their debates. You care about the moment when the pen scratches the word "you" across the page and your chest tightens like it remembers how to hold something. Later, you sit beneath the bay window and begin writing another letter. This one to your mother. She's been gone for years, but still there are things you wish she'd told you. Not about cooking or cleaning or how to remove ink stains from lace gloves. But about this. About how to be alone without unraveling. You write, why didn't you warn me how loud the silence would be? Then, to your younger self, you didn't know it yet, but you would outlive him. And you'd be okay. Not always, not every day. But enough. The ink dries slowly today. You blame the damp. But you know it's your hand hesitating more. Trying to get the words just right. These aren't entries for yourself anymore. They're half messages, half spells. You don't expect replies. But it's comforting to imagine someone, somewhere, listening. Here's your quirky moment. You accidentally wrote a grocery list in the diary. You meant to jot it on a scrape eggs, butter, flour, but instead you turned the page and began scribbling above a paragraph about the day you found Thomas' old fishing hat under the settee. It strikes you later that this, too, says something. That the everyday and the eternal have started to merge. That morning isn't always separate from the mundane. Sometimes, grief asks for onions. You let the list stay. You write, grief, like dinner, needs salt. Today the house smells like stewed turnips. The kind Thomas never liked. But you cook them anyway because they're easy and you don't have to think much while they bubble. You hum again, same tune as before, still unrecognizable. Button looks vaguely offended. You open the drawer before bed and reread the letter to Thomas. You don't cry. You just trace your own handwriting and feel, for a flicker of a moment, like his reading over your shoulder. You imagine what he'd say. That's too many commas, Lael. You almost laugh. Almost. This morning, your fingers itch before you even rise. Rain's coming, you can tell by the way your knuckles throb like they've swallowed thunder. You dress slowly, tugging your stockings up with practiced care, then button the black bodice with hands that once embroidered initials into handkerchiefs now folded and useless in drawers. You pull the embroidery hoop from the basket beside your chair. It's been months, maybe longer. The fabric is a pale cream, stretched tight as a drum, half covered in a looping vine you abandoned back when grief first arrived and made beauty feel irrelevant. But today you thread the needle. You don't follow a pattern. Just stitch where your hands remember. A leaf here. A curl of vine there. It's uneven, inconsistent. The green is darker than before. You realize you've run out of the cheerful shade Thomas used to say looked like spring. You don't mind. This vine is not for show. You write in your diary, mid-stitch. I think I'm trying to pin something down. A moment, a memory, my own breath. Historians still argue whether needlework served as silent rebellion or quiet resignation. In the 19th century, women stitched initials, borders, entire verses into linens not always as decoration, but sometimes as testimony. Proof that they existed. That their hands moved. That even in grief, they made something that lasted. You remember your grandmother stitching through storms. She said the needle steadied her. You never understood that until now. There's something comforting about watching thread disappear into fabric, only to reappear again a few centimeters away. It feels like a promise. What goes under will come back up. Just maybe not in the same place. Button tries to paw the dangling thread. You shoo him gently, then reward his restraint with a scrap of turkey. He accepts it with the solemnity of a king, then promptly falls asleep on your lap, heavy and warm. You don't move for nearly an hour. Later, you sit by the parlor window with the embroidery in your lap. Outside, the trees sway like old women dancing, slow and unsure but still proud. The thread pulls evenly through the cloth now. Your fingers remember the rhythm. You write again. There is comfort in looping. In going back. In knowing I control this line. Today's peculiar thought, hardly even a full moment, is this. What if grief is just another thread? Not to be cut, but carried. Woven into things. Not the main color, but always there, a strand running under everything. Invisible from far away but unmistakable up close. You stitch that thought into the hem. Just a single word. Grief. Tiny, croak. You know no one will see it. But it's yours. At midday, you brew tea, and notice the teaspoon is missing. Likely slipped behind the drawer again. But for a brief second, your mind whispers, he took it. Not seriously, not with belief but with yearning. You smile at the thought of Thomas stealing spoons in the afterlife, just to make you notice. You add that to the diary. If ghosts steal spoons, let them take the dull ones. Here's something no historian debates. Grief changes your humor. It softens it. Or maybe it sharpens it like a joke carved from bone. You laugh now, not at the absurdity of life, but at its texture. Its bumps. The way it insists on continuing even when you've stopped moving inside. By evening, your embroidery is a tangle of vines and leaves, each one different, some oddly shaped. A few knots where the thread caught. You consider undoing them, but stop. Mistakes are part of the pattern now. You couldn't remove them without unraveling the whole thing. You write, this cloth understands me. Flawed. Threadbare. The whole. You set it aside. Not finish it, just resting. Like you. You begin walking again. Not far. Just the path from your porch to the old elm, and then along the fence that separates your yard from the Witherspoon's chickens. The first time you step outside with purpose, and not to sweep, not to fetch milk, but simply to move. You're startled by how foreign your own feet feel. Like visitors. The shawl around your shoulders flaps in the breeze. It's the dark wool one with the frayed fringe. The one Thumb has used to joke made you look like a mysterious spy from a penny novel. You clutch it tighter and continue. By the third walk, you've started calling it the Whiteo's Loop. Historians will tell you about Whiteo's Walk's narrow platforms atop sea captains' houses, where women once paced, waiting for ships that didn't return. You don't have such a perch, but you have your yard. Your gravel. Your boots that press small, determined ellipses into the damper. And you do scan the horizon. Not for ships, but for memories. You write later. Each walk is a letter my feet write to him. I do not mail them. I simply trace them again tomorrow. On your sixth walk, you pause beneath the apple tree. It hasn't bloomed yet. Too early. But you think you smell something sweet, faint. It makes your chest ache. Not because it reminds you of him, but because it doesn't. For once, you're simply smelling a tree. You're startled to realize how relieving that is. Today's odd moment, you find a button in the dirt. Not yours. Not Thomas. Too small. Possibly from a child's coat. You pocket it without thinking. A tiny offering. Something tangible. Something inexplicable. You press it into the diary's pages later, between entries about the robin and the embroidery. You write, something lost, now found. It doesn't belong to me. And yet I carry it. You keep walking, day after day. Sometimes with a purpose, fetch eggs, check the mailbox. Sometimes not. The neighbors begin to notice, but they don't wait. Not out of rudeness. Perhaps they think you're praying. Or unraveling. Either way, they give you space. You're grateful for that. Historians still debate whether daily walking routines were respectable for Whiteo's of your time. Some insisted a woman mustn't wander alone, lest it invite gossip. Others believed fresh air was the only cure for melancholy the church couldn't explain. You walk anyway. You've always preferred footpaths to opinions. One morning, you bring the diary with you. Not to write while walking, that would be impractical and wildly ungraceful, but to read aloud. You open to a random page, let your eyes fall where they may, and begin reading. Your own voice startles you. Out here, in the open, your words sound different. Lighter. Like someone else wrote them. Someone braver. Button trails behind one day, tail high, as if he invented the route. He stops every few steps to sniff a stone or leaf, then races to catch up, indignant when you haven't paused to admire his discoveries. You write, today I was accompanied. My steps were 2 plus pause. And that was enough. One evening, twilight dripping through the branches, you sing. Not loudly. Just a thread of melody you once knew, a lullaby, maybe. You don't remember the words. But your voice remembers the shape. And you realize something. The walk is no longer a chore. It's a habit. A comfort. A rhythm. Like embroidery. Like tea. Like writing. Grief likes patterns. You whisper loud, hello Thomas. I walked again today. Not to find you. Just to walk. And for the first time, that feels like progress. You arrive at church 5 minutes early now. Not out of devotion, but strategy. It gives you time to choose your seat, third pew from the back, Eisel side, perfect view of the stained glass window, and, more importantly, perfect avoidance of Mises with her stares. They never said Wido should be invisible, but they've always said it without saying it. And still, there's the space beside you, where Thomas sat, bubble in hand, marked with the folded corner he never remembered to smooth. The empty pew is a presence now, a kind of quiet elbow in your side. Today's sermon is about job. Of course it is. Every third Sunday, it seems, some poor minister dusts him off and waves him in your face. You mouth along, not out of belief, but memory. You know the kittens better than the meaning. Historians still argue whether sermons comforted or constrained Widos. You find they do both. The language is gentle, but the expectations are loud. Faith, yes, but also silence. Strength, but in soft tones. Hope, but not too soon. Not too visibly. After service, there's tea. There's always tea. Weak, floral, and accompanied by the clink of judgment in every porcelain cup. Today, someone says the thing they all say eventually, at least you had so many years together. You smile. It is the practiced one. The kind that seals lips but not feelings. Inside, you're screamingious, and I wanted more. You don't say that. You take another sugar cube instead. You write later, they mean well. But I am now a story with a neat ending. The church ladies whisper when you pass. Not unkindly. But not unkindly either. The way they look at your hair loosened slightly from your bonnet. The way they arch eyebrows when you laugh at the vicar's joke. They want morning to look like stillness. But you are learning to move. You make a small scandal this week by wearing a brooch. Not black jet. Not onyx. A tiny silver rose, tucked neatly at your collar. It had been your mother's. You wore it without thinking. They noticed. Mrs. Whitlow cornered you by the scones. That's rather bright, dear. You looked her straight in the eyes and said, it belonged to my mother. She outlived 2 husbands. Wore it every Sunday. And then you smiled. The real kind. She blinked. Nodded. Took 2 scones and walked away. You write, perhaps I'm not invisible. Perhaps I'm turning opaque again. Today's quirky moment. The hen book fell open to a song you haven't thought of in decades. Abide with me. You sang the first verse out loud, unaware until you heard someone behind you echo it softly. When you turned, there was no one there. You wonder if your voice just filled the space. Or if someone else remembered too. Button greets you at home with all the enthusiasm of a royal butler. You remove your gloves, set down the brooch, and stare into the mirror for a long time. You write, I work hard today. Only a whisper of silver, but I felt like thunder. The diary pages are nearly full. You start considering what to do when you reach the end. Buy another. Stop. You think, perhaps he'll just begin again. Reread the first page, and answer it, 1 year later. But for now, you have tea to brew, button to feed, letters to fold, and a quiet kind of courage building behind your ribs. You're not expecting company. You haven't expected anything in weeks, really, except that the laundry will stay damp on overcast days and Button will meow twice before every meal. So when you hear the knock 2 sharp raps, followed by an awkward pause, you freeze mid-stitch, needle hovering like a bird over its perch. It's Joseph Cartwright, the carpenter's son. Barely 30, hair too tight for a man who works with sawdust, and eyes that carry the nervous politeness of someone who knows your tragedy but not how to hold it. Is here to fix the gate. You'd forgotten it was even broken. You stand aside, let him in. He smells faintly of wood shavings and cold morning air. You offer tea. He accepts. That surprises you. Young men don't usually linger. In the parlor, he sips. Carefully, eyes flicking to the embroidery in your lap. My mother used to sew, he says. She made little birds that hung in the kitchen. You nod. A pause stretches. He doesn't fill it. You write later, he didn't speak much. But his silence wasn't afraid of mine. Over the next week, he returns twice. Once for the gate latch. Once to measure a loose floorboard that's been groaning like a wounded cello. Each visit is brief. Each time, he removes his hat. His manners are almost suspiciously perfect, like something taught at the edge of Gree. You find yourself thinking of Thomas less during these visits, not because Joseph replaces him, but because for a few minutes, you're present, focused, aware of the way the light falls across the chipped teacup, the way your hands fidget at the hem of your sleeve. You write, grief used to be the loudest thing in the room. Now it sometimes shares space. Historians still debate the acceptability of Wyo speaking freely with younger men in this era. Some advice columns insisted on propriety, while others warned against emotional entanglements that could stain reputations. You think of neither. You think only of how kind it is to speak with someone who does not treat you like broken porcelain. The town whispers, of course. You catch a glance from the grocer's daughter. Raised brows. A curl of a smirk. You respond by asking for a second apple. Firm. Green. Just like Thomas like. Your quirky moment today. Joseph tells you a joke. A silly one. About a chicken, and a milliner, and a hat too wide to fit through the church door. You laugh. Not out of politeness, but because it is funny, and you haven't laughed from your belly in so long it startles you. You write, today, I laughed. Not like a wayo. Just like a person. That night, you dream not of Thomas. Not of sorrow but of fixing the loose board yourself. In the dream, your arms are strong, your back doesn't ache, and you wear trissers. You wake smiling. Progress. Perhaps. You see Joseph once more that week. He doesn't knock this time. Just nods as he passes the fence, toolbox in hand. You nod back. Nothing more. But your heart beats a little faster than it used to. You don't write about him directly anymore. Instead, you begin recording how many birds land in the yard. How many cups of tea you pour without setting out a second. The number is growing. It starts with your feet crunching gravel. Just another Wyo's walk, so you think. Shawl wrapped tight, diary tucked under one arm, button trailing a respectful 6 pieces behind. The afternoon light glows like honey through the trees, surby and slow, and you decide on a whim to keep walking past the elm, past the mailbox, past the last lilac bush he planted the spring before his caw became serious. The cemetery isn't far. You've avoided it, mostly. Not because it's frightening, but because it's final. A place with punctuation. But today your legs move as though they remember something before your mind does. You don't tell them to stop. The gate squeaks in that way all cemetery gates do, like it's auditioning for a ghost story. The gravel path curves around a yew tree and then there it is, his stone. Familiar. Unchanged. Smooth gray, weather already softening the edges of his name. You sit. You don't kneel. You don't weep. You sit cross-legged in the grass like a schoolgirl who forgot she grew up. You speak. Aye. Button immediately lies down and begins to bat at something invisible. You glance at him. Then back to the stone. Then you open the diary. You read to him. Not an old entry. Today's. Fresh ink. You read it like his just in the next room. You stumble once on the sentence about the plum preserves. You smile at the note about the robin. You pause, briefly, over the line about the young man with kind eyes and a hammer. You write later, reading aloud made me feel heard. Even if no one answered. Historians still debate whether cemetery visits were acts of remembrance or performance. Some widows brought flowers every week. Some sat for hours. Some never returned. You're not sure what you are. Only that this sitting in silence beside a name carved in stone feels more like company than many conversations you've had this year. You bring him a pebble. Not a flower. He was never one for buckwheats. You balance it on the top of the stone. It stays. Today's quirky moment, a robin does appear. Not on the stone. Not near your feet. But a few yards away. Puffed like a pompous landlord, hopping from one cracked headstone to the next. You stare. It stares back. You say, you again, and it gives you a look that feels entirely too knowing. You write, even the birds are growing familiar. Or I am. You stay longer than you mean to. Watch the sun ease lower. Let the shadows lengthen. You imagine Thomas telling you to get home before dark, that it's damp and you'll catch a chill. You imagine arguing. Then laughing. Then telling him he worries too much. You whisper, miss arguing. The wind picks up then, rustling the grass just enough to sound like someone breathing out. You gather your things. Hat button on the head. He rolls once, then follows. Back home, you remove your shawl, set the kettle on, and open your diary once more. You write, I visited. I stayed. I left. All 3 were hard. All 3 were good. You wonder if you'll go again. Not tomorrow. But perhaps soon. The date stares at you from the corner of the calendar. Mocking, really. You almost circled it last month, then stopped yourself. Thought maybe if you didn't mark it, it wouldn't arrive. But it has. With the same certainty as frost. His birthday. The number feels louder than usual. Not because of the cake you want bake, or the pipe you want lay out near the hearth, but because of the echo it creates. Everything today reminds you of some version of he would have been 62. He would have grumbled about his knees. He would have teased you for hiding his socks. Again. You write, has having another birthday I don't get to witness. Hours in time for continuing. You make tea anyway. 2 cups. One steeps longer than necessary. You let it sit until it turns bitter. You drink it. Historians document Victorian mourning anniversaries with clinical precision. The first year of death is to be marked by solemnity. Wyos may resume limited social contact after 12 months. As if grief had an expiration date. As if a calendar could measure it. You don't dress differently today. You don't need to. You feel different. Like every cell has turned inward slightly, waiting for something that will never arrive. You go about the day with mechanical grace. Dusting. Sweeping. Writing. You start to sort his books, then stop halfway, holding a well-worn copy of The Tempest in your hands, thumbing the underlined passages. He loved that line. We are such stuff as dreams are made on. You hated it. Thought it was sentimental nonsense. You love it now. Today's odd moment. A sudden craving for cherry pie. You haven't eaten one since the funeral. You walk to the market, buy fresh cherries, and return home. You bit them slowly, methodically, juice staining your fingers like ink. You bake the crust too dark. You eat it anyway. You write cherry pie today, not in his honor, just in my hunger. You don't cry until dusk. That's when the quiet settles into its sharpest edge. Not because of a memory, but because the world didn't pause. Children played outside. Someone laughed too loudly on the corner. A carriage clattered by like a cheerful drum roll. All while you sat still, holding nothing but a teacup and his birthday like a paperweight. You move to the writing desk. Open the diary. Write just one line across an entire page. Today was sharp. You consider stopping there. But something in you itches. You write more. Every year, this day will come. I cannot stop it. I can only outlive it. Then I did not speak his name aloud today. But I heard it in the back of my mind. As steady as a drum. Thomas. You sign your name just once. You don't usually. But today, it feels right. Like a note at the end of a song. Then, you close the diary with both hands. You press your palm. You survived his birthday. And that's enough. The dream begins with eggs. Not grand, not symbolic, just eggs. You're cracking them into a bowl, humming that tuneless melody you always hum now, when suddenly you look up and Thomas is there. Barefoot. Laughing. Holding the salt upside down like a child caught in mischief. You don't speak in the dream. You just laugh too, the way you used to. That open mouth, chin-wrinkling kind that leaves your eyes wet. You wake with the sound of it still ringing somewhere in your chest, though your mouth is closed and the room is silent. You don't cry. Instead, you sit in bed a moment, touching your palm to your cheek as if the echo of him might still be lingering there. You write, dreamt of him today. No grand message is. Just eggs. Laughter. And enough sunlight to make the windows glow. Historians still argue whether dreams serve therapeutic roles for widows or were considered troubling signs of inability to move on. You're not interested in their arguments. You're interested in how real it felt. Not because he returned, but because, for once, you weren't grieving in the dream. You were living. Today, you decide not to do the laundry. The weather is perfect for it. But you don't care. Instead, you open the parlor curtains wide and let the morning breeze move through the house like an old friend. You don't play music, just listen to the creaks of the floorboards, the shuffle of buttons pause, the birds outside discussing territory. And then you sing. Just a verse. A hymn. Half remembered, half invented. You hum your way through the gaps. Your voice shakes a little. But you don't stop. It fills the room like steam rising from a forgotten kettle. You write, I sang today. I don't know who. For. Your odd moment. You catch yourself talking to the house. Not metaphorically. Out loud. As if it's a pet. Don't be drafty, you mutter to the kitchen window. Hold your breath. You whisper when dust rises as you shift the carpet. The house doesn't answer. But it does seem to listen. You take down the old blanket from the attic today. The one with the faded red fringe and the hole in the corner from that time Thomas tried to toast marshmallows over candlelight. You air it out on the porch, then drape it across the sofa. It makes the room feel different. Warmer. More lived in. You realize something else today. The dreams are changing. They used to be silent, just images. His coat on a chair. A door ajar. His handwriting on a blackboard you couldn't read. But now he speaks. Last night, it was simple. You still wrinkle your nose when you're lying. You laughed in your sleep. You think. Button was staring at you when you woke, as if to say, you're getting weird. You write that dreams no longer age. They amuse. Later, you sit in the garden. The apple tree is finally blooming. Pale pink petals like tiny promises. You lean against the trunk and close your eyes. For a moment, you pretend you never lost him. Not in a delusional way, but in a gentle, imaginative way. What if he were simply in the other room, reading the paper, snoring on the couch? What if you open your eyes and smile at the absurdity? But the smile lingers. Because even if he isn't here, you are. And somehow, you're still blooming too. There's a new rhythm now. It's not the old rhythm, not the one with 2 spoons at breakfast and shared gloves on frosty walks. But it's yours. Quiet, but steady. A pattern stitched together for mornings with 1 cup of tea, letters you don't send, and the sound of button chasing shadows. You wake without dread. You stretch. You hum. You don't count the hours until evening anymore. Today, you decide not to write in the diary. Not because there's nothing to say, but because you don't need to say it. The silence doesn't demand translation. It simply exists. Like birdsong in a room with closed windows, you know it's there, even if you don't hear it directly. You walk to the market in your blue dress. Yes, blue. It's not scandalous, but it is noticeable. Several heads turn. A few murmurs follow, but you don't shrink from them. You smile. You even nod once to Miss Harding, who always believed your mourning should last until your own bones gave up. You buy lemons, honey, a fresh spool of green thread, and one small bunch of lavender. Not for the grave, for the windowsill. You write yes. Eventually I wore blue. I laughed. I stitched. I smelled lavender. I did not apologize. Historians still debate whether YOs in the 19th century experienced true freedom or simply a different sort of confinement. A home without a husband was still a home under scrutiny. But you've stopped wondering whether you should feel free. You've begun noticing that on certain days you do. Today's odd joy. You spoke with the flower girl at the market. Her name is Isabel. 17, all elbows and freckles and ambition. She complimented your brooch, then asked what you were stitching. You told her, a vine, for a table runner. She said, that's beautiful, and meant it. Later, you write, she asked me to teach her. I think I will. You spend the afternoon trimming loose threads, riddying ribbons in your bonnets, and opening a drawer you haven't touched since last autumn. Inside, a stack of newspaper clippings, a broken thimble, and your old letter opener. The one Thomas gave you with a note that said, for words you haven't written yet. You hold it for a long time. Not heavy. Not sharp. Just familiar. You pick up the diary, and instead of writing to him, you write to yourself. Dear Lillian, you are still here. It's the first time you've done that. You end the letter without signing it. You know who it's from. Evening comes with a breeze that flutters the curtains. Button snores on the windowsill. The lavender sways in a jar half full of cloudy water. You sit in the chair by the fire, not to grieve or remember, but simply to sit. You don't need music, or distraction, or even words. You are not waiting for anything. You are not waiting for him. You are waiting for the kettle to boil. And that, for the first time in a long while, is enough. The entries are different now. You still write but less often. Not daily. Sometimes not even weekly. When you do, the lines are longer. The ink darker. The handwriting steadier. The sentences wander into subjects that have nothing to do with Thomas, or grief, or even yourself. Today you wrote about a book. Not a romantic one. Not a tragedy. A political tract, actually on labor unions and factory reform. You read it twice, then underlined a passage that annoyed you and scribbled, this is idiotic. You laughed while doing it. You write in the diary, I argued with a man I've never met. It felt fantastic. Later, you write about a debate at the town hall. You attended. Sat in the back. Wore gray with a little lace collar. Someone gave you a handbill, and you folded it into your glove. You asked a question just once and the man at the podium blinked as if surprised that whitos come with opinions. Historians rarely agree on how public whitos were allowed to be. Some claim they faded into housework. Others insist many became forces founding schools, publishing essays under initials, managing family estates with brutal efficiency. You wonder if you're becoming one of those. Not a force, exactly, but no longer fog. Today's peculiar moment. You skipped a page in the diary. Not by accident. Not because you ran out of space, but because you wanted to. The blank page feels like a window you don't need to open yet. You write on the next one, left a page empty. Maybe for nothing. Maybe for something yet to arrive. You pass the market and see Isabel again. This time, she's carrying 2 baskets and no gloves. She smiles and waves. You wave back. She runs to you. Miss Harper, I finished my first embroidery. It's awful, but I'm proud. You tell her that pride is the most important stitch of all. She beams. You forget, for a full minute, that you are a whito. You remember instead that you are a woman. With a name. With a sharp tongue. With 2 strong hands and a surprisingly full calendar this week. Your writing now includes poems. Observations. Even plans. You scribble about planting something new in the garden. Not for Thomas. Not in memory. But for shade. For bees. For yourself. You laugh more freely now. Sometimes you catch yourself talking to Button like he's a roommate. If you're going to steal my chair, at least pay rent, you scold. He blinks. You blink back. You're both very comfortable being mildly ridiculous. Evening comes. You light a candle and begin drafting a letter to your cousin in Dover. Not about grief. Not about death. Just news. Updates. Rested for oat biscuits. You tuck the page into an envelope and pause. This one will be sent. You write in the diary, today I stopped writing to the past and started writing from the present. The pen doesn't tremble. The paper doesn't sigh. The house remains still but not heavy. You reach the last page of the diary without realizing it. No grand fanfare. No swelling music. Just the small flick of a finger turning over a leaf, and discovering there is no next. You stare at this final, lined page and something inside you both tightens and relaxes. Like a bow unstrung. You don't panic. You don't feel rushed. In fact, you set the pen down and let the page breathe. It's not quite ready yet. And neither are you. Instead, you go about the day. Fold linens. Pick herbs from the window box. Chat with Isabel about whether bluebells will bloom early this year. You laugh when she tells you a boy tried to kiss her behind the butcher's cart. He missed, she jiggles. Hit my cheek. Said he was nervous. You tell her nervous boys are the most dangerous, they tend to learn quickly. Back home, you sit at the writing desk. Not because you're sad, but because this is your place now. Your chair. Your view. Your time. You open the diary to the last page. You begin. Today was ordinary. Just those words. You pause. Then you continue. I hung a new curtain. I swept the porch. I baked lemon bread and gave half to Mrs. Alden, who still convinced him wasting away though I've gained 5 pounds. I stitched the last vine into the runner, it curls in a loop, like it's turning back toward the center. I fed Button. I talked with Isabel. I laughed when I dropped the butter. I cried for 30 seconds when I found his old cufflink behind the dresser. Then I put it in the drawer next to my brooch. A truce of sorts. You underline the next line. I did not speak to Thomas today. I did not need to. You sit with that. Then, slowly, you write. I think he would be proud of me. I think I am. Proud of me. You draw a small flower in the corner. A clumsy violet. The same one you doodled on the first page, months ago. You date the entry. You don't sign it. Instead, you press a small, dried petal into the seam and close the diary with both hands. You whisper, thank you. Not to Thomas. To yourself. You place the diary in the drawer. Gently. No lock. No ribbon. Just a closed book, resting. You stand. Stretch. The window lets in a breeze that smells of soil and lavender. You step outside. Button follows, tail high. The gravel path crunches beneath your boots, and you trace your usual loop past the tree, the garden, the rosa bush you once considered digging up, now blooming defiantly in pale pink. The sky is soft with dusk. No drama. No storms. You feel peaceful. You feel present. You feel real. And when the breeze brushes your cheek, you don't turn to see if it's him. You already know it's you. Now, the house is quiet. But not the empty kind. Not the brittle, echoing hush of fresh loss. No. This quiet is warmer. Familiar. Like the sound of a kettle just before it boils. Or the hush of heavy quilts settling into your lap. You move through it slowly now. Letting each moment stretch, like a yawn before sleep. The air is gentle. The lamp is low. The diary is closed, resting softly in its drawer, its pages full but never finished. Outside, the moon lifts like a silent witness. The stars begin their silent roll call. And somewhere, Button snores, curled into a perfect comma on the foot of your bed. You breathe in. You breathe out. You are still here. And you are still becoming. Let the weight of the day loosen from your shoulders. Let the shape of this story settle like a blanket around your heart. You are not alone. You never truly were. The night will hold you now. The dreams will come, when they're ready. And if they don't, that's fine too. Some nights are just for resting. Some stories are just for remembering. So lay your head down. Let the light fade. Let the world soften, and the silence stay sweet. You've done enough for today. You've been enough for today. Sleep well. And when you wake, carry something gentle with you.